Hi and welcome to my talk. I either got you with the QR code on my poster or you found your way here through some other means, but happy to have you. So this is just a little bit of a extra mini presentation to complement the poster on my talk on if neighborhood perceptions modify the associations between objectively measured walkability and physical activity in working-aged adults living in Canada. So quick background, the built environment or where you live has an influence on your physical activity levels. We can typically measure where you live in two broad ways. Either we can ask you where you live and if you think it's supportive for physical activity, or we can objectively measure that, and then we as researchers can say if that's walkable or not. And then as far as physical activity goes, there's also those kind of two broad categories. There's the objective physical activity, so how much activity do you actually do? And then there's self-reported physical activity. So then we ask you, how much do you think you do? So to answer our question, we utilized data from the Canadian Health Measures Survey, specifically two different cycles, cycle 5 and cycle 6. So this spanned the years from 2016 to 2019. We specifically picked those two cycles because they had the self-reported neighborhood walkability data. Those are the only two cycles that was asked. We did have some exclusion criteria. We wanted to make sure that the respondents could actually walk in their neighborhood. So if they indicated on a question on the survey that they were unable to walk without support in their neighborhood, they were excluded. We wanted to look at the working age adults because they have a potentially somewhat more stable physical activity trajectory than maybe retirement ages or younger adults or those still in school. So we excluded anybody younger than 18 or over 64. We excluded individuals who identified that they were pregnant. And then we also wanted to look at only if they resided in urban environments, because there are some differences in rural and urban associations with walkability and physical activity. So we wanted to make this a little bit more generalizable to urban areas. So we excluded anybody with a rural postal code. That left us roughly 22,400 participants, and we split this up between males and females. Our neighborhood walkability measure, our objective neighborhood walkability measure, we use the Canadian Active Living Environment Index. And this is a quick summary from their paper here. So it's an index made up of street connectivity, density, destination, and transit stops, and then summed into an overall numerical score. This is the self-reported neighborhood environment data that we used. It's from the Physical Activity Neighborhood Environment Scale. So this just asks questions along the lines of, in about 10 to 15 minutes from your house, what is the main type of housing in your neighborhood? Or are there shops, or are there transit stops, or how is your sidewalks, etc. And this again was summed into an overall score as well. For physical activity, we utilized objective measures of physical activity, and in particular accelerometer measured physical activity. And we utilized two different variables, average daily minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity and average daily steps. And this was conceptually, in general, our question. We know from previous literature that objective walkability influences physical activity. So in general, the more walkable your neighborhood is, the more physical activity you undertake, specifically transportation physical activity, but there's evidence just physical activity in general. And what we're wondering is, does your perceptions of that environment influence this or modify this relationship in any way? Based on some other literature as well, how were we going to try to model this? Physical activity is notoriously positively skewed. So for example, a lot of people do no activity, and that gets into an issue with zeros. However, for our case, using accelerometer measured physical activity, there's a positive skew. So a lot of people do a little bit of activity, and then you can see that very few people do a lot of activity. So you can kind of envision that positive skew. To help with this, we undertook a modeling using a gamma distribution, which is well suited for this type of data. Here's our high-level results for our sociodemographics. So we have a roughly even split between males and females. Males tended to do about 30 minutes a week of MVPA, females about 26 minutes. Steps were fairly similar as well, so males did do a point estimate higher here, 8,900 steps, females 8,300 steps roughly. And you can pause and read the rest of these sociodemographics if you want. As far as our results, so for females, we didn't find any interaction. We did find some main effects. So the more objectively walkable the neighborhood was, so the AL index, active living environment index, the higher that was, the more physical activity the females undertook. However, we didn't find any interaction with our female respondents. However, for males, we did. So we found both an interaction for MVPA and for steps. And also we split this up into young and old. So we did split it by male and female. And then we also wanted to see, okay, is there some differences in maybe those that are middle-aged, so say 40 to 64 versus 18 to 40. And that was more or less our median age as well, was roughly 40. So this was kind of a statistical split as well as a theoretical split as well. And when we did this, we actually found that our interaction that we noted in the total sample for males was only present in the older or middle-aged individuals. And we can see that here. So interestingly enough, we found that as our males went up in objective walkability, they tended to decrease in their physical activity. So we can see that here. So that the x-axis is objective walkability. So we can see as they increase in objective walkability, a lot of these lines trend down. However, the different colors here correspond to perceived neighborhood walkability. So what we can see is those that perceive their neighborhood as very walkable, the green color here, actually are buffered from this negative association with increasing objective walkability and decreasing physical activity. And even if you look at the slopes, it's positive. So there's some sort of interesting relationship going on here. And this relationship holds true for not only moderate to vigorous physical activity, but also our daily steps. So the take-home message here is that it's complicated. So the neighborhood environment is important to support physical activity. However, if we want to tailor interventions to improve this or to change physical activity as a population, it might need to be a little bit more nuanced than a blanket size fits all approach. So based on the individual's age or sex or immigration status or something else that we haven't explored here, we might need to make tailored interventions. Thank you again for listening.